fire is never going to go away. But we as a group collectively can make sure that we're not talking about active shooters in the news anymore. You know, that is one of my dreams when we first started PASS. I said, you know what, I want to be sitting on my front porch with my grandchildren going, I remember when. And, you know, and so hopefully that's what we're going to get to. And I think we will with a lot of the people that I get to meet and the passion that I see of people in school security and safety. So I also want to thank DHI because they were one of our founding partners. So when we first started, DHI jumped on board. I learned more about door hardware then than I ever thought was possible. And in the last year, I learned even more. So one of the things that I have recognized with door and door hardware is that you all have a brilliant strategy. I admire you all. You have your own language, okay? When we talk about door hardware, I look at specs every day. Do you know that the specifications, there is no other specification that has a schedule that is alphabet soup? Do you know that I can look at a door schedule and there's not actually a word to pronounce in there? It's absolutely amazing. The only thing I do know is -630 is, what is that? That's the standard finish, right? Okay. And I've been actually looking at this for over 20 years. So, you know, I started in the industry in 1999, was selling life safety systems, started to get into security about 2001, and in the education market. And when I looked at a door, I said, okay, can I put a strike on it or can I put a mag lock on it? I'm sure you all just think that is fantastic, right? I have evolved since then, but I still haven't figured out your language. So one of the things that I really do admire about it is a lot more complex than I ever understood. And one of the things that I really appreciate is the fact that I am seeing this industry specifically really taking a step forward on how are we going to help secure the schools. And the message that I've been able to hear from the DHI group as a whole, and I mean across the country, is we're not arguing about, well, this manufacturer is just doing this to sell and they're going about it the wrong way. I mean, it just seems like you all are rowing in the same direction of we need to put these types of hardware on the doors to keep kids safe, not to sell another product. And I applaud you guys for that because that is just absolutely awesome. So since I am a fire and life safety guy, before we get to the agenda, I want everybody to close your eyes real quick and point to your nearest exit. Very good, very good. So one of the things that I always do like to talk about whenever we're in a school, any kind of building, when I walk through it, because first thing I look at is what kind of fire alarm system do they have, what kind of cameras do they have, but just awareness. One of the biggest things when I talk about PASS today is the fact of how do we heighten awareness of what's going on around in our surroundings, and how do we instill that into the next generation? Because if they're aware of what's going on around them, as we start putting the tools in place to make sure they're in a safe and secure environment, we're going to help mitigate these threats. And so that's one of the things that I always like to see is, to be honest, when I used to say that 15 years ago, everybody pointed to the door they came through. We've already changed because of what's going on in today's world. And so we need to be able to keep adapting, and we need to be able to keep doing that. And I really believe that PASS allows us to do that. So the agenda today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about who is PASS, why PASS, the challenges that our schools face, some of the solutions, also some of the new things that have come through from the door hardware perspective, and doors and frames. Do you guys just do door hardware? You also, because you do like doors and frames and the glass and the film and all that good stuff, right? Yeah, okay. Don't ask me about how many mils for what ballistic force protection 7, 8, 9. I don't know, but I got a guy who does. So to start with, Partner Alliance is a 501(c), so we're a nonprofit organization. One of the key things that we look at is we want to be able to show schools and the K through 12 industry a holistic approach on how they bring processes, people, and technology together in a unified approach to provide a safe and secure environment. And that's really what our overall mission is. In order to do so, we want to make sure that we are vendor agnostic. So You will not see, we do have a lot of great PASS partners, but you do not see anything from PASS of saying, here's the latest and greatest lock from Townsteel, as for example. And I'll use them because they've graciously jumped all in on PASS and helping us out just recently. So, you know, one of the things that we want to make sure of is, and it's something we had to do from the security industry side, I don't know so much about the door hardware side, but we were just vultures. We were a horrible market. Frankly, I think we still are a horrible market. You should have listened to my weapons detection roundtable the other day. But one of the problems is that we don't have a unified message. We've never had a unified message, and that's one of the reasons why PASS was created, is because K through 12 was saying, we want to secure our buildings, but where do we start? Because the video surveillance guy will tell me all the reasons why I need to put in cameras first. The access control guy will tell me all the reasons why I need to put access control in first. The fire guy comes in and says, does your fire alarm work? Then we'll start talking about communication. You know, so we wanted to see, how do we give them that unified approach, give them a way to be able to quickly and easily understand some of the things that they're dealing with, so that they literally have 5 to 10 bullet points to say, okay, Rebecca, here's what we want to do with our classroom doors, and I understand that this is the type of hardware I want. I don't know if it's grade 1, I don't know if it's classroom, storeroom, whatever. I do know I want this. So that they know what they're getting, and they can kind of set those expectations. Because I'm sure as you guys go to schools a lot, they really don't have that. They just don't have that knowledge. And why should they? They're educators. Having educators be experts on door hardware, like I said, I've been doing security for 25 years. I still haven't figured out door hardware. So, you know, we need to be able to provide them with that education. So that's what we did with the PASS guidelines, is we really came in with a layered approach. We wanted to look at from the campus and move our way in layers where we can put in barriers to help deter, detect, and delay any type of threat that a school might have. So that's how we kind of started our approach, and then from there we do a tiered approach. And when we talk about a tiered approach, what we're trying to do and what we're starting to see with schools now is, this is not a, we got the bond issue to put security in, that's how we're going to put in security. You know, because it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. It changes every day. The threats you're dealing with are every day. You know, it's one of the things, first time I went to a parent-teachers conference when my kids were, well, some of them were still in elementary school, and I was like, they're not bringing home books, but they're bringing home Chromebooks that they want dad to put on the Wi-Fi so that they can watch YouTube. And I'm like, no, that's not allowed in my house. There's reasons for that. You know, but they did that because how we're educating children have changed because of the technology. And with the threats that we have out there, and the technology is morphed, where we have to do the same thing to the schools on how we're going to just adapt how that school is, just like you do with education. And so it's an ongoing process. So we do that with the tiered approach. Number one, to be able to help show that ongoing process. But number two, and we all were talking about this a little bit earlier, almost every school is unique. How they operate is slightly different, even if they're in the same district. We like to say they're either fiefdoms, communities, empires, we're not quite sure, you know, but they all kind of are unique in how they do things. And so maybe a tier 4 level for this school doesn't work for this school. And not all districts are built the same. They're not all, we have 10 high schools, 8 elementaries, and 32 you know, middle schools or what have you. You know, they're all different. Their building size are different. Their layouts are different. So we wanted to do this tiered approach to give them options to look at, what do I need, my individual needs, and be able to have them quickly be able to look and do that. So one of the things I do want to talk about are some of the things that PASS is not. One of the things that is very, very important to us, is there anybody in here that sells barricade devices before I start? Thank God. Okay? One of the things that we are big on in PASS is making sure that there is that what is being put in is still meeting standards. Okay? And if you don't have a standard that you can't meet, that we can't benchmark and measure, we want people to be partners. We are a 501(c)(3). I want you to hit the little donate now button. Y'all can do it individually if you want now. We just got that working. But the fact is, we do want partners, but we want partners that are going to work with us on the same mission and vision, and in order to do so is to do those standards. And my really crash course on locks and locking hardware was pretty much after Sandy Hook. Those guys came out of the flippin' woodwork. And they all wanted to talk to me about, how can we talk to the fire marshal about putting these in? And I'm like, what standard do you guys have? Well, it doesn't matter because we're cheap. No. Okay? I've got chickens and geese. I got a little deadbolt lock thing that works. It costs $4.95. I'm not putting that on a door in a school. Okay? There's a reason why we don't do that. And so one of the things that we are not is, and we do have a barricade white paper, so when you do run into a district that thinks those barricade things are cool, download that white paper. It's very well done. First white paper we ever did. So, but we want to make sure that we are knowing that this equipment is going to work, and number two, making sure it's actually should work for a school. You know, I think, Rebecca, if I remember, you guys do like some detention stuff and some pretty specialized type things. You know, you don't go there and say, here's how you secure your classroom. It's this door that we'd put on a jail cell. Okay? Will it work? Sure. Is that a good idea to put in a school? Probably not. Okay? So, I'm sure some of my teachers would have wanted to take my friends and I and say, can we just have one room that has that door, please? So, but that's some of the things that we're seeing in schools that, you know, we joke about that, but I actually had an architect call me and said, Scott, is this even legal? They're building quiet rooms. Have you seen these? Where they put a mag lock on it and then they have somebody stand out the door and hold the button so the door stays locked? I'm like, and somebody thought that was a good idea. How? You know? And, you know, and really, I have two of my daughters are special needs. One of them that we adopted from China, she's missing part of her brain, so how she actually functions as well as she does now is absolutely amazing. She's my social butterfly. But logic, higher end logic doesn't work. And so, you know, those are the type of things that I really started to understand from the door hardware side when people were talking to me going, Scott, this is why it's important not to pinch and grasp in one motion. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. I really don't understand what you're talking about until I watched my daughter, and she was 13 years old then, and she couldn't open up the back sliding glass door because she didn't know about that little latch. She just knew I always open it. You know, that was the thing. It was like, well, in an emergency, there's no way she's getting out of her room. You know, so this stuff is vitally, vitally important. So, moving on from there, when we look at this, one of the things that we do work with the administrators, and whenever I talk with a school, even when I'm going, because, well, my day job to feed my family is to actually sell security products to schools. But I always kind of start with PASS and looking at what is your policy and procedures. What are the things that you're trying to prevent? You know, there was a settlement that had happened with Juul where all the states and schools were awarded money for vape detection. Do you know that there's not anything in that settlement that says you actually have to buy vape detectors? Do you know what a bunch of schools did? Bought vape detectors. I talked to 15 different schools that did this. They were all administered by IT, and they said the detectors work great. I said, cool. How's it doing with your vaping issue? I don't know, but I can tell you when it goes off. It goes off on this time, and this time, this time, and this time. I'm like, there's no policy and procedure. There's no punishment. There's nothing for that technology to help them with the root of the problem. They just know it exists. And so, you know, I know one school, very big high school, they put in $75,000 worth of these devices for the administration to say shut them down. Because it's become such a problem, and the feedback we're getting from our parents is leave our kids alone. So that's the type of things that we want to try to avoid when we do this. So how they prioritize, we kind of go into that in the past guidelines and looking at what are the threats, what are the risks that you're looking for. The other thing to talk about when we talk to them is it takes a team. So I don't know if this is something that you guys talk about. I know, Brandon, I think you and I were talking just a little bit of, you know, for us in some locations, it's the guy who is in facilities that takes care of the door hardware. He's like my gatekeeper, you know. Is he part of the security team as a strategic approach on how we're going to secure the school? Is the counselor? Is the nurse? When I talk to the superintendent and say, hey, is school security important? I don't have any of them say no. When I say, who's in charge of that from an administrative perspective? Well, we don't have anybody full-time. That's fine. Who's in charge of that? Like, where is that part of their thing? Well, we have IT handle it. That's cool. Who's your security director? He's an ex-law enforcement officer for 30 years. Great guy, built this entire security team of ex-officers and NSROs, and man, they're great with the kids, and they really are passionate. Did you talk to them about what you're doing with the video surveillance? No, IT handles that. You know, so looking at how are we looking at a team? What is the team they're putting together? Because when we start having this conversation with school districts, you start seeing a lot of light bulbs going off. Brandon, I think you and I, we all witnessed that at the district we were at just yesterday. We started talking, I think we started with ballistic film, and then by the time we were done, it's like, you know, we probably ought to walk all the buildings and just see where we are. You know, that's the kind of conversations that we start having, because once they build this team, and the successful districts that I've seen that are, in my opinion, ahead of their time, they have this team that's built. And when I go in and start speaking to them of, okay, we now want to put wireless, I know, Todd, you're not a fan of it, I am, but I work in electronic security, of having wireless door locks on all of our classroom doors. And I'm having that conversation with the security director, teachers, an administrator, IT. You know, it's a group, it's a team that's coming together to saying, how are we going to do this right? And when they form that team, they start realizing that when we talk about a unified approach, it's not that difficult, because they're all doing some little piece of it. It's bringing them all together and saying, okay, what is the need? If our parents are worried about shooters coming through our front door, how do we change that dynamic? From how we speak with our students, to how we secure the building, to how we educate on options, on if this happens, what do you do? Okay, when a fire alarm goes off, what do kids do?
Nothing.
Yeah. They exit the building. Okay? Remember the fire guy. You know, if you're on fire, what do? Stop, drop, and roll. Okay? We're not teaching a lot of those, because a lot of it comes down to, and I've listened to this of, well, we don't want to hurt their psyche. We don't want them to feel scared at school. When I first did my Alice training, my oldest daughter, I came home and I said, you guys will love this, because they showed me how middle schoolers could take down somebody. Not that we want them to do that, but I was like, the kids will love this. They can jump on dad and knock him on the floor in his face, which they did, and they loved it. You know, but what my daughter was, when I started talking about these are the things I was learning, I was talking about these options-based. The next day I got a call from her English teacher. She absolutely loved English. She said, is Jacqueline okay? I said, why do you ask? I said, because she always sits up front, and she sat right by the back door today. And I don't know why. And so I asked Jacqueline, she goes, what you told me. If they say we're going in lockdown, that door goes outside, across the street, and then I'm walking home. Works for me, sweetheart. So, you know, these are the type of things that if we do that education, we can really change what happens. So the challenges that they do face is they are being bombarded by everybody. They're being bombarded by the community, law enforcement. We all have an opinion. Todd, you and I had an opinion just yesterday. You know, and it was good that we were sharing that opinion, because none of those opinions are wrong. But schools are getting inundated with that. Which one do I say is right? Well, when you can take those opinions, and that's what we do with PASS, and say, here are some of the strategies in using that to make law enforcement happy, to make your parents happy, to make your teachers happy, this is how we can go about doing it. And that's what PASS really does with that, is to help them. So moving on from there, like I said, our biggest thing that we're looking for is to deter, detect, and delay. We do it through our different layers. We start at the district, the property layer, the parking lot layer, the building layer, and the classroom layer. I'm not going to go into all of these, but I do want to go into some that are kind of relevant with you guys. And what I'm really looking at from this standpoint is for you to look at each one of these and where do you guys fit? Okay, where do you guys fit? From a district-wide perspective, might it be important to invest a couple of $100 and put a blue box outside with a master key that law enforcement can get to as a district-wide standard? Okay? And from there, you start having the conversations of, well, you don't understand. I got Schleg over here, I got this over here, I got this over here, I got master keys all over the place. Now we can start having a conversation that you guys know and can move forward with. So look at those type of things, you know, the property, the perimeter itself, the parking lot layer, the building perimeter, how are we keeping doors from not being propped open? One of the things, oh my God, I got an education. I went with a door hardware specialist. We did 35 schools in Texas because they wanted to put new door hardware on all the doors and make sure that they had alarm indicators on them so that they knew whether the doors were open or closed. We went 87% of the doors didn't close properly. And I was like, wow, that's kind of a thing, I guess. I never looked at that, you know. But the fact is, a lot of these schools are 20 plus years old. You know when they replaced a door? Never. You know, and so those are the type of things that you can help educate them with when we're doing this, instead of, you know, quite frankly, you know, the backpack, so that, well, if my kid's wearing the bulletproof backpack, we'll be okay. You know, no, these are not the type of things we're looking for, because frankly, you guys already have the solutions. How many classroom doors have been breached by an active shooter when it was locked? How many? Zero. There was one school classroom that was breached where one person died, and it was the person who propped himself up against the door, Professor Livescu at Virginia Tech. 13 kids were in that room on the second floor. He was a Holocaust survivor. He broke the window and told him to jump out the window while he held the door shut. You know, those are the type of things where, as chilling that still makes me today to think about, that's the type of things of, if we are training on strategies and we're empowering the students on what those things are and how we use the door locks properly, that helps empower them and helps them feel safe. So those are the type of things that we look at from there. And then from there we go into our tiers, as I was saying before, of our tier 1. Pretty much what we've looked at is tier 1 is one of those things that you should be able to do within 30 to 60 days with minimal cost. Okay? And this is some of them because, well, I was at a school district 2 days ago where I walked right into the front door. Walked right in the front door. And I was 5 minutes early and there was nobody there. I could have walked through that entire building, nobody would have even known I was there. Now, they had lots of cameras, so they would pick me up later. Okay, so what's the first thing? How do we lock the front door? Who's in charge of making sure the front door is locked? And when it's open, who's there monitoring it? Okay, yes, that means somebody's got to change what they do day to day, but we're not adding an FTE. We're not putting in a $2,500 audio video system, although I'll sell it to you if you want. You know, we're not putting ballistic glazing on the door. We are just starting with the awareness. You know, tier 2 really comes to the next level of, here's that next level that is something that you can do in 3 to 8 months that's going to be of a minimal cost. And some of that might be, how do we retrofit some of the classroom doors with locks that are appropriate to use for classrooms, you know, and step that a little bit at a time. You know, those type of things. Maybe it is adding the intercom buzzer there so that somebody can remotely see what's happening at that front door, and we're securing that front door. When we get into tiers 3 and 4, what we're looking at is how do we take those things to the next level? And I'm going to kind of show you that, hopefully from a perspective that you guys understand and say, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And if it's not, well then tell me and we'll change it. So we actually just changed our building perimeter. Our tier for access control, we had 3 things on it. Tier 1 was make sure your front door was locked and you had a remote buzzer system. Tier 2 was put access control on it. Tier 3 was to make sure that it could be centralized and locked down. And Tier 4 was make sure if you have a district-wide security operations center, that they can have remote control of that door. That's what we had when we first started. This is what we've got now. And what we recognized was one of our problems is people were being very reactionary. He shot through the main entrance. Let's make the main entrance like a prison now. Except there's a problem with that. What they do in Uvalde? What did they do in Parkland? Walk through a propped open door. Okay, so these are the type of things that we started looking at when we developed kind of what our Tier 1 is. And then moving on to that Tier 2, Tier 3, and Tier 4, where we're stepping ourselves up. So that Tier 1 and 2, we kind of, and what we're working on is when I get NFPA to really recognize that we're going to be a standard and they can either pay us to do it or we'll just become the standard, we'll take over NFPA, that's no big deal. They're a nonprofit too. You know, is that Tier 1 and 2 would be the standard. If you're building a new school, it should be a Tier 2. Everything in our guidelines is a Tier 2. Tier 3 and 4 are the things that you start looking at after you did that. You know, how do we improve on what's there? So that's kind of how our tier levels go. So an example on this is that we do have this white paper that I encourage you to download. It's our Secure Visitor Entry Center. Yes, we came up with that all by ourselves. And one of the things that we looked at with this is how we change, and you're seeing this big time now, but we've been seeing it over the last 3 or 4 years, is how do we take that main entrance that has also been our visitor entrance and the office, and how do we make that more secure? You know, that first Tier 1 that we look at, you've got that vestibule, how much is it to put a door in the wall and maybe block out a space that might have been a classroom and make that your office? You know, a fairly minimal cost to be able to at least get started, okay? So one of the things that I always like to talk about, as I said, you know, the neat thing is everybody says, well, it's not as easy as you think. And I'm like, when you go to the movie theater and it's that opening premiere where the line's out the door, you're one of those people that just walks through all those little barriers that they put up. Or in TSA, right? No, we do this. We walk for like 13 miles in TSA to go 100 feet. Why do we do that? We're conditioned to do it. Why can't we do that when we're talking about an entrance? Just put some cones up. All right. As a kid, I loved running over the cones till my dad said some of them were filled with sand and water. And I was like, oh, that could hurt the car. But the fact is, just doing little things like that is what we can do to help them be more secure. And we're making it more aware. When you have a sign that says, visitors, please enter here, when we're looking at someone who wants to go after that building, when they go in there, are they going in screaming, look at me? And shooting them? No. They're trying to get in as far as they possibly can and just start killing people. That is all they're looking for. You start mentally preparing them of, I might need to think about doing something different. And a security consultant that I admire greatly, he said, Scott, my entire job is to make sure that the bad guy looks at that building and goes, now I'm going to go look at another one. It's just not worth going in that building. And those are the type of things that we can do. So with the entry, the Tier 1, moving it to that. The Tier 2 is now looking at it and saying, hey, now that we've done that, is it possible that we can block off that main entrance? So that these two doors, and maybe it's not even this type of scenario, but we're just putting a wall in here. with another door, that kind of thing of kind of forcing that traffic on which way it goes. Because one of the things that absolutely amazed me when I was talking with a lot of people is they're like, well, Scott, why can't we just have one door? Why do the architects build it with all these big doors? And I'm like, because you have 3,000 people that have to get out of the building in case of a fire. But fire is not a problem. I understand that, but that's what code says. There's a reason why we do it that way, is because we mitigated the threat. And we're just doing the same thing here, is changing the dynamic on how we do it. The next step from there on a tier 3 level is kind of reinforcing the secure visitor entry. And so this is where we start getting into some more of the electronics and really looking at the secure visitor entry center being, this is where they check in. This is possibly where you have a window or some sort of box type partition in the wall that allows them to pass the things like the computer they forgot, the lunch they forgot, the water bottle they forgot. I asked one day, I was like, yeah, I'm sure they forget their cell phones. Then I remember I had 5 kids. They never forgot their cell phone. Brought them pants, didn't bring them cell phone. So, those type of things of what are some of the things that are day to day that the office has to deal with? Because remember, we also have to recognize we're asking somebody to do more things above and beyond what they're already doing. So how do we make it easier for them? How do we make it easier for them to, okay, here's how we condition you. You come in, there's a big sign right here. Please leave the stuff for your children here. Check in here. You start moving that process. We also fit them into a place where when they do enter into the building, if they have severe intent, they can't just get into the building. And I know all of you here who have kids have seen it, especially when they were building stuff in the late 80s and early 90s, how many main entrances went right into the cafeteria, the common room, like all of them. So these are the type of things that we can start doing. Then from the tier 4 perspective, and this is where we talk about, okay, when we're building the school, and we can still do this with a remodel, but when we're building the school, can we make the administration area where 90% of the interaction we have with the outside world doesn't go into the public portion of the school? We have conference rooms that this is where we have our parents and teachers and students when we need to have those calls, our guidance offices in there, where we are completely separating the day-to-day operations of visitors from the public area. And so these are just some ideas that I'd like you guys to think about because, in my opinion, maybe I'm wrong, this is where you guys live. And when you start working on the bigger and start talking about how we take that unified approach, we don't start talking about, well, gee, that door lock cost $422 and this door lock cost $253. We want this door lock because that gets us here because our next step is to go here. Our next step is to go here. And we can start having those conversations with our educators. And frankly, when we start having that and we educate them in that, they start asking those questions. They may not completely understand everything that's behind it, but they understand, just like we're at that school district yesterday. He understands that, hey, I did this is good. What's my next step? And when we start having those conversations, security becomes something they always do. So one of the things that we did change, sorry guys, but we had to do it. Okay, we got so many questions on, do I use a storeroom lock, a classroom lock, a office lock, a privacy lock, a blah, 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 blah. Okay, I actually had 2 major manufacturers, I'm not going to name them, you all can probably guess, who were responding to an RFP, 5,000 exterior doors that we're going to replace. They all came in to say, we use the past guidelines and let us tell you why we're the only one to put in. Here's what the guideline says. And so didn't the other guy. And Chuck got that phone call, and then he called me and a couple others and said, so what do we tell them? Find the sales reps and tell them to come to my house. And when I beat them senseless, then we'll understand. But the part of the problem is that we still need to change our industry too and how they think. But also helping make them help our educators better understand what it is. So what we did is we took it and said, instead of doing the mortise cylindrical, like I said, you all have your own language. We tried to kind of decipher it and said, here's a type 1, a type 2, a type 3 with pictures to say, this is what they're talking about. Now from there, here's where we feel those devices fit in the tiers. And from there, here's the one where if you feel like this is a place to start, then we recommend this. That makes it so much easier for the end user to understand that when you're educating them, because then they can say, hey, this is what I want. And Rebecca, if I take too long, just tell me to stop. So, last thing that I'm going to get to is our components. So we do have, after we go through the layers, we have a component. And this is growing. We didn't have architectural last revision, so that's come in. We have 7 components now. We're going to have a digital infrastructure component, and we're also going to have an enhanced and emerging component. And essentially what we're doing is we're breaking the tier levels into different technology components and how that fits. So when we talk about access control, we're talking about door locks. If I remind you before, our 4 things before, it was all about electronic access control. You know why? Because Jim and I wrote it, and that's all we knew. And we recognize that we have to move past that, and we have been able to do that. So those components are inside each layer, and that's where we have those tiers. And so when a customer asks you, or I would say, is it Greg? Yeah, I think you asked me, you're like, what does the customer prioritize on? And I was like, well, it depends on what his risk is. What's he worried about? Well, what do you think about a classroom? Well, it depends, Greg. What component are we talking about? If you're asking the fire guy, I want to make sure that the kid knows there's a fire, get out. I want the kid to know there's a tornado. Go to the tornado shelter, you know? So, but what about an active threat? Here's where our concern is. Okay, do you have the appropriate lock on the door? Those are the type of questions that we can have, and when we're doing those, we're looking at that unified approach and not looking at it from a siloed approach.